In the spring of 1943, the skies over Europe belonged to the Luftwaffe, or so its pilots believed with unshakable certainty. The German Air Force, hardened by years of campaigns from Poland to the Russian front, had earned a fearsome reputation, its Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs slicing through enemy formations with ruthless precision. The pilots, many of them veterans with dozens of kills to their names, wore their confidence like a second skin. They'd faced British Spitfires, Soviet Yaks, and American Thunderbolts, and while these adversaries had their strengths, none had truly challenged Germany's grip on the air. So when reports began to trickle in of a new American fighter, the P-51 Mustang, the Luftwaffe's response was a mix of amusement and disdain. To these battle-scarred aces, the Mustang was just another Yankee experiment, a flashy machine that would prove no match for their skill and their war-tested aircraft. They dismissed it as a minor threat, a fleeting nuisance in a war they were certain they could still dominate. The P-51 Mustang, with its sleek lines and polished aluminum skin, looked more like a racer than a warrior to the German pilots who first heard of it. They'd grown accustomed to judging their enemies by the machines they flew, and the Mustang didn't impress them. Early intelligence reports described it as a lightweight fighter, underpowered and underarmed compared to the Luftwaffe's workhorses. Its original Allison engine, they scoffed, lacked the punch to climb quickly or match the speed of their Messerschmitt Bf-109s or the rugged Focke-Wulf FW-190s. The Mustang's armament, 4 .50 caliber machine guns in its initial models, seemed paltry next to the cannon-heavy setups of German fighters. A toy plane, one Luftwaffe ace remarked over a mug of coffee in a French airfield mess hall, his comrades nodding in agreement. The Americans think they can race us in the skies with that? The Germans had reason to feel smug. Their pilots were among the best in the world, schooled in the brutal crucible of aerial combat. They'd honed their tactics over years of dogfights, learning to exploit the strengths of their aircraft, fast climbs, devastating dives, and the ability to absorb punishment while dishing out their own. The Luftwaffe's commanders, poring over maps in their headquarters, had faced waves of Allied bombers and fighters and still held the upper hand. The British had put up a fierce fight during the Battle of Britain, but their Spitfires were short-ranged, unable to strike deep into German territory. The American P-47 Thunderbolts, now appearing in greater numbers, were tough but sluggish at high altitudes, easy prey for a skilled Messerschmitt pilot. The Mustang, to the Germans, seemed like more of the same, a machine built by a nation still finding its footing in the air war, unlikely to tip the scales. What the Germans knew of the Mustang came from scattered reports and a handful of early encounters, mostly in secondary theaters. The plane had first appeared in small numbers with the British, who used it for low-level reconnaissance and ground attack missions. These early Mustangs, powered by the Allison engine, were nimble but limited, rarely engaging German fighters at the altitudes where the Luftwaffe reigned supreme. German pilots who'd seen them in action dismissed them as escorts for slow bombers or targets for their own fighters. They'd heard of the Mustang's sleek design, its aerodynamic frame that cut through the air like a knife, but they saw no reason to fear it. "It's fast, sure," a young Focke-Wulf pilot said, shrugging as he cleaned his guns after a mission. "But speed alone doesn't win dogfights. It takes guns, guts, and experience, and the Americans are short on all three." The Luftwaffe's confidence wasn't just rooted in their own prowess. It was bolstered by their underestimation of American ingenuity. They viewed the United States as an industrial giant but a military novice, a nation that could churn out planes but lacked the tactical finesse to use them effectively. The Mustang, they assumed, was a product of this inexperience, a showy design rushed into production without the refinement needed for the brutal skies of Europe. German intelligence, stretched thin by the demands of a multi-front war, failed to pick up on the changes brewing across the Channel. They didn't know that the British had already seen the Mustang's potential, pushing for a new engine to unlock its true capabilities. They hadn't heard of the whispers of a Merlin-powered variant, a marriage of American airframe and British engineering that would soon transform the P-51 Mustang into a game-changer. To the Germans, these details were irrelevant. The Mustang was just another Allied plane, destined to fall to their guns like so many before it. In their airfields across occupied Europe, German pilots swapped stories of their victories, their Messerschmitts adorned with tally marks for downed Dennis. They spoke of the P-51 with the same casual contempt they reserved for other American planes like the P-38 Lightning or the P-40 Warhawk. "The Americans build pretty planes," a squadron leader remarked, his voice laced with sarcasm, "but they don't know how to fight in them." His men laughed, their morale buoyed by years of dominance. They'd faced the growing might of the Allied air forces and come out on top, their losses offset by the kills they racked up. The Mustang, in their eyes, was a minor annoyance, a plane that might buzz around the edges of their battles, but lacked the range, firepower, or staying power to challenge their control of the skies. This dismissal wasn't just bravado, it was a strategic blind spot. The Luftwaffe, stretched across fronts in the East, the Mediterranean, and now the West, was beginning to feel the strain of attrition. Their pilots were flying more missions with fewer planes, their mechanics struggling to keep aging airframes aloft. Yet they remained confident that their skill and experience would carry the day. The Mustang, with its untested reputation and limited early appearances, didn't register as a threat worth worrying about. German commanders, focused on repelling the growing waves of Allied bombers, saw the P-51 as a sideshow, a fighter that might escort a few B-17s, but couldn't match the Luftwaffe's ability to dictate the terms of battle. They planned their defenses around the assumption that their fighters would continue to dominate, picking off Allied planes like the same ease they'd shown in earlier years. But confidence, when unchecked, can breed complacency. The German pilots, so sure of their superiority, failed to see the storm gathering around the horizon. They didn't notice the Mustangs being fitted with new engines, extending their range far beyond what the Luftwaffe thought possible. They didn't anticipate the American pilots, young but eager, who were learning the art of aerial combat with every mission. They didn't account for the sheer scale of American production, which could flood the skies with fighters faster than Germany could shoot them down. The P-51 Mustang, dismissed as a minor threat, was about to prove them wrong in ways they could scarcely imagine. The Luftwaffe's laughter would soon turn to alarm, as the sleek, underestimated fighter prepared to rewrite the rules of the air war. By the summer of 1943, the P-51 Mustang was no longer just a rumor whispered among German pilots. It was a reality, streaking through the skies over Europe, and its first clashes with the Luftwaffe were starting to unravel the smug confidence that had defined their earlier dismissal. The German aces, who had laughed off the Mustang as a sleek but underpowered toy, were beginning to encounter a fighter that defied their expectations. With its new Merlin engine, a British-designed powerhouse that transformed its performance, the Mustang was revealing capabilities that caught even the most seasoned Messerschmitt and Focke-Wulf pilots off guard. In the skies over France, the Low Countries, and the edges of Germany, these initial encounters showcased the Mustang's blistering speed and uncanny maneuverability, sowing confusion among the Luftwaffe and planting the first seeds of doubt about their unchallenged dominance. The minor threat was starting to look like something far more dangerous. The transformation of the Mustang began with its marriage to the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, a change the Germans hadn't anticipated. The early P-51s, powered by Allison engines, had been nimble but limited, confined to low-altitude roles that kept them out of the Luftwaffe's high-altitude hunting grounds. But the P-51B, fitted with the Merlin, was a different beast. It could climb to 30,000 feet with ease, matching or surpassing the performance of the Messerschmitt Bf-109 and Focke-Wulf Fw-190. Its speed, pushing past 440 miles per hour in level flight, made it one of the fastest fighters in the theater, and its maneuverability allowed it to turn tightly, dive sharply, and recover with a grace that left German pilots scrambling to keep up. These qualities, barely hinted at in the early intelligence reports, were now coming to life in the skies, and the Luftwaffe was unprepared for what they faced. The first significant clashes came during the Allied bombing campaigns of 1943, as American B-17 Flying Fortresses and B-24 Liberators began striking deeper into German territory. The Luftwaffe had grown accustomed to picking off escort fighters like the P-47 Thunderbolt, which, while rugged, lacked the range to stay with the bombers all the way to their targets. The Mustang, however, was different. Fitted with drop tanks, it could escort bombers from bases in England to Berlin and back, a range that stunned German commanders. In one early engagement over northern France, a squadron of Bf-109s dove on what they thought was a vulnerable bomber formation, only to find a group of P-51Bs waiting for them. The Mustangs didn't lumber like the P-47s. They streaked upward, closing the distance with alarming speed. Before the German pilots could react, the Mustangs were on their tails, their .50 caliber machine guns spitting streams of tracer fire that tore through wings and fuselages. The German pilots were caught off balance. They'd been trained to exploit their aircraft's strengths, fast climbs for the Bf-109, brutal firepower for the FW-190, but the Mustang seemed to match them in every arena. Its speed allowed it to dictate the terms of the fight, diving out of the sun or chasing down fleeing Messerschmitts that couldn't outrun it. Its maneuverability let it twist and turn in dogfights, evading the German fighters' attempts to lock them in their sights. In one skirmish over the Netherlands, a veteran Luftwaffe pilot in a Bf-109 found himself outmaneuvered by a P-51 that matched his every move, turning inside his loops and climbing faster than he thought possible. He managed to escape, but not before his wingman's plane was sent spiraling to the ground, riddled with bullets. It was like fighting a shadow, he later told his squadron, his voice tinged with frustration. No matter what I did, it was there. These encounters were a shock to the Luftwaffe's carefully honed tactics. German pilots relied on hit-and-run attacks, using their fighters' climbing ability to dive on Allied formations and then zoom away before escorts could respond. But the Mustang's speed disrupted this rhythm. It could chase down a Messerschmitt in a dive, stick with it through a climb, and still have the fuel to pursue. In another clash near Aachen, a group of FW-190s attempted their usual tactic, diving on a bomber formation and expecting to scatter the escorts. Instead, the Mustangs turned the tables, using their superior speed to cut off the Germans' escape routes. Two Focke-Wulfs went down in flames, their pilots bailing out as the Mustangs looped back to protect the bombers. The surviving Germans limped back to base, their confidence shaken by a fighter that refused to play by their rules. The Mustang's pilots were also starting to make their mark. They weren't yet the equals of the Luftwaffe aces, whose kill counts often numbered in the dozens, but they were eager and quick to adapt. They learned to exploit the Mustang's strengths, using its speed to engage and disengage at will, avoiding the prolonged dogfights where German experience might prevail. They studied Luftwaffe tactics, noting how the Germans favored high-altitude ambushes, and began to counter with their own strategies, luring Messerschmitts into lower altitudes where the Mustang's maneuverability shone. In one engagement over Belgium, a group of P-51s baited a squadron of Bf-109s into a low-level chase, only to turn sharply and climb, leaving the Germans struggling to keep up. The Mustangs then dove back, catching the Messerschmitts in a deadly crossfire. 3 German planes were lost, and the American pilots returned to base with a newfound swagger. The Germans began to take notice, their earlier dismissal giving way to grudging acknowledgement. After-action reports from Luftwaffe squadrons started to mention the Mustang by name, no longer lumping it in with other Allied fighters. Pilots described its speed with a mix of irritation and respect, noting how it could outrun their fighters in a straight line and hold its own in a turning fight. They spoke of its range, which allowed it to appear where the Luftwaffe least expected, over German airfields, deep behind the front lines, or circling above bombers that should have been easy prey. One squadron leader, reviewing the loss of several planes over the Ruhr Valley, wrote in his report, "The new American fighter is not what we thought. It stays with the bombers, it fights like a devil, and it does not tire." His words, circulated among other units, carried a warning. The Mustang was not a plane to be taken lightly. These early clashes weren't decisive victories for the Allies. The Luftwaffe still held the edge in experience and numbers, but they were a wake-up call. German pilots, who had once laughed at the idea of an American fighter challenging their dominance, began to approach engagements with more caution. They started to adjust their tactics, ordering their fighters to avoid prolonged chases with Mustangs and to focus on quick, coordinated strikes before retreating. But these adjustments were reactive, born of necessity rather than foresight. The Mustang's ability to surprise, to outpace and outmaneuver, was forcing the Luftwaffe to rethink their approach to the air war. The pilots who returned to their airfields, their planes scarred by 50-caliber rounds, carried stories that spread unease among their comrades. The toy plane was proving to be anything but. For the Luftwaffe, the realization was dawning that the P-51 Mustang was more than a fast fighter. It was a sign of things to come. The Americans were bringing not just a new plane, but a new kind of air war, where range, speed, and numbers could overwhelm even the most skilled pilots. The Germans, stretched thin by losses in the East and the relentless Allied bombing campaign, were beginning to feel the pressure. The Mustang's early successes were a glimpse of the storm on the horizon, a storm that would soon threaten to sweep away their control of the skies. The Luftwaffe's confidence, so unshakable just months before, was starting to crack, and the P-51 Mustang was the wedge driving it apart. By late 1943, the P-51 Mustang was no longer a surprise to the Luftwaffe. It was a growing menace, a sleek, silver predator that haunted the skies over Europe and chipped away at the German Air Force's once iron grip on air superiority. The initial encounters, where the Mustang's speed and maneuverability had confounded German pilots, were just a prelude to a series of dogfights that would mark a turning point in the air war. From the bombing raids over Germany's industrial heartland to the ferocious clashes during the Allied operation known as Big Week in February 1944, the Mustang proved itself not just a capable fighter, but a weapon that could outfly, outlast, and outfight the Luftwaffe's best. These battles, fought high above the clouds and deep behind enemy lines, saw German pilots pushed to their limits, their confidence eroding as the P-51's relentless presence began to tilt the balance of power. The Luftwaffe's dominance, so long unchallenged, was starting to crumble, and the Mustang was at the heart of that collapse. The stage for this shift was set by the Allied strategic bombing campaign, which aimed to cripple Germany's war machine by targeting factories, airfields, and cities deep in the Reich. The Luftwaffe's primary mission was to protect these vital assets, intercepting American B-17 and B-24 bombers before they could unleash their payloads. In the past, German pilots had relied on their Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf FW-190s to swarm these formations, picking off stragglers and exploiting the limited range of Allied escort fighters like the P-47 Thunderbolt. But the P-51B and C models, now equipped with Merlin engines and drop tanks, changed the equation. These Mustangs could escort bombers all the way to Berlin and back, a range of over 1,800 miles, staying with their charges through the entire mission. German pilots, who'd grown used to attacking bombers after their escorts turned back, suddenly found themselves facing a fighter that didn't leave, one that could match their speed, climb, and firepower at any altitude. One of the earliest signs of this turning point came in late 1943, during raids over Bremen and Schweinfurt. A squadron of Bf-109s, expecting to pounce on a bomber formation as it approached its target, instead ran headlong into a group of P-51s flying high cover. The Mustangs didn't hesitate. They dove, their speed carrying them into the German formation before the pilots could react. The dogfight that followed was a blur of twisting planes and tracer fire, with the Mustangs using their agility to outturn the Messerschmitts and their speed to chase down stragglers. 2 Bf-109s went down in flames, their pilots caught off guard by the P-51's ability to stick with them through tight maneuvers. The surviving Germans broke off, stunned by a fighter that could fight at 30,000 feet and still have the fuel to pursue them back to their airfields. "It's not just fast, it's relentless," one pilot reported, his voice heavy with frustration. The real test came during Big Week, a massive Allied air offensive in February 1944,
aimed at shattering the Luftwaffe's ability to defend Germany's industrial heartland. Day after day, American bombers, escorted by hundreds of Mustangs, struck aircraft factories, ball-bearing plants, and Luftwaffe bases across Germany. The Germans threw everything they had into the fight, committing their best pilots and planes in a desperate bid to stop the onslaught. But the Mustangs were everywhere, their silver wings glinting in the winter sun as they swarmed German interceptors. In one clash over Augsburg, a group of FW-190s dove on a B-17 formation, only to be intercepted by Mustangs that seemed to appear from nowhere. The Mustangs used their superior climb rate to gain altitude, then dove back down, their .50 caliber machine guns shredding the German fighters' wings and engines. 4 Focke-Wulfs were lost in minutes, their pilots bailing out or crashing as the Mustangs looped back to protect the bombers. These dogfights were brutal, testing the skill and nerve of both sides. The Luftwaffe's pilots were still among the best, their experience honed over years of combat. But the Mustang's pilots, many of them young Americans who'd cut their teeth in earlier missions, were closing the gap. They'd learned to exploit this P-51's strengths, using its speed to control the pace of the fight, and its maneuverability to outwit German tactics. In one engagement over Leipzig, a P-51 pilot from the 357th Fighter Group, flying high above the bombers, spotted a pair of Bf-109s climbing to attack. He dove, pushing his Mustang to nearly 500 miles per hour, and caught the Germans before they could react. His guns tore through the lead Messerschmitt, sending it spinning toward the earth, while his wingman dispatched the second. The American pilots, once dismissed as novices, were becoming aces, their kill counts rising with every mission. The Luftwaffe's losses were mounting, and not just in planes. The Mustangs weren't content to escort bombers. They hunted German fighters aggressively, seeking them out over airfields and rail yards. In one daring raid, a group of P-51s swept low over a Luftwaffe base in southern Germany, catching a squadron of Bf-109s as they scrambled to take off. The Mustang's machine guns raked the airfield, destroying planes on the ground and scattering ground crews. The German pilots who managed to get airborne found themselves outmatched, their planes unable to outrun or outmaneuver the Mustangs. The raid was a humiliation, a sign that the Luftwaffe could no longer count on the safety of their own bases. German commanders, reading the after-action reports, began to realize that the Mustang wasn't just protecting bombers, it was dismantling their air force piece by piece. The psychological toll was as significant as the physical losses. German pilots, who had once flown with swagger, now spoke of the Mustang with a mix of respect and dread. They called it the fork-tailed devil in some squadrons, a nod to the P-51's distinctive twin-boom radiator design and its deadly efficiency. Stories circulated of dogfights where Messerschmitts, caught in a Mustang's sights, couldn't shake it no matter how they twisted or dove. The Mustang's range meant it could loiter over German territory, picking off fighters as they took off or landed, a tactic that sapped morale. One pilot, nursing a damaged FW-190 back to base after a clash, described the Mustang as a hunter that never sleeps. The Luftwaffe's veterans, who had once laughed at the idea of an American fighter challenging them, were now looking over their shoulders, wary of the silver streak that could appear at any moment. The numbers told a grim story for the Germans. During Big Week, the Luftwaffe lost over 500 fighters, a blow from which it would never fully recover. The Mustangs, flown by groups like the 4th, 352nd, and 357th Fighter Groups, racked up kills at an alarming rate, their pilots claiming dozens of German planes. The American production lines ensured that every lost P-51 was quickly replaced, while the Luftwaffe struggled to replace its planes and pilots. Germany's training programs, stretched thin by years of war, couldn't produce new aces fast enough to replace the veterans falling to Mustang guns. The Allies, meanwhile, were flooding the skies with P-51s, their numbers growing with every month. The Germans, who once relied on their skill to offset numerical disadvantages, were now fighting a war of attrition they couldn't win. These dogfights marked a clear turning point. The Luftwaffe, which had dominated the skies for years, was losing its ability to control the air. The Mustangs weren't just winning battles. They were enabling the Allied bombing campaign to intensify, hammering German industry and infrastructure with impunity. The P-51's ability to escort bombers deep into enemy territory meant that the Luftwaffe had to fight on the Allies' terms, engaging when and where the Americans chose. German commanders, poring over dwindling pilot rosters and damaged airfields, began to shift their strategy, pulling fighters back to defend key targets rather than contesting every raid. But even this was a losing battle. The Mustang had turned the hunter into the hunted, and the Luftwaffe's grip on the skies was slipping away. The turning point wasn't just about losses. It was about momentum. The P-51 Mustang, with its speed, range, and growing cadre of skilled pilots, had shifted the balance. The Germans, who had dismissed it as a minor threat, now saw it as a force that could follow them anywhere, fight them on equal terms, and keep coming no matter how many they shot down. The dogfights of late 1943 and early 1944 were the beginning of the end for the Luftwaffe dominance, a prelude to the collapse that would follow. The Mustang, once a joke, was now a juggernaut, and the skies over Europe would never be the same.
By the summer of 1944, the P-51 Mustang had become a specter haunting the Luftwaffe, a relentless force that tore through German fighter formations and escorted Allied bombers to the heart of the Third Reich with impunity. The days of German pilots dismissing the Mustang as a minor threat were long gone, replaced by a grim reality. The sleek American fighter was dismantling their air force, plane by plane, pilot by pilot. From the skies over Normandy to the industrial cities of Germany, the Mustang's unmatched range, speed, and firepower turned it into a wrecking ball, shattering Luftwaffe squadrons and leaving their bases smoldering. Its ability to protect bombers deep in enemy territory while simultaneously hunting German fighters with ruthless efficiency marked a devastating phase in the air war. The Luftwaffe, once the unchallenged master of Europe's skies, was crumbling under the weight of the Mustang's onslaught, and the balance of air superiority had tipped decisively toward the Allies. The Mustang's dominance was most evident in its role as an escort for the U.S. Army Air Force's strategic bombing campaign. By mid-1944, American B-17 Flying Fortresses and B-24 Liberators were striking targets deep inside Germany. Oil refineries in Ploesti, factories in the Ruhr Valley, and rail hubs in Berlin. Missions that would have been suicidal without effective fighter cover. The P-51, now primarily the D model, with its bubble canopy and 6.50 caliber machine guns, was the perfect tool for the job. Its Merlin engine and external drop tanks gave it a range of nearly 2,000 miles, allowing it to stay with bombers for the entire journey, from bases in England to the farthest reaches of the Reich and back. German pilots, who had once exploited the limited range of earlier Allied escorts like the P-47, found no such weakness in the Mustang. It was there at the start of a raid, it was there over the target, and it was there when the bombers turned for home, a constant, unyielding presence. The Luftwaffe's attempts to intercept these raids became exercises in futility. German commanders threw their remaining Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf FW-190s into the fray, hoping to overwhelm the escorts and reach the bombers. But the Mustangs were ready. In one raid over Munich in July 1944, a large formation of Bf-109s climbed to meet a B-17 group, expecting to exploit their high-altitude advantage. Instead, they were met by a swarm of P-51s from the 352nd Fighter Group, their blue-nosed fighters diving from 30,000 feet with terrifying speed. The Mustangs broke the German formation before it could reach the bombers, their machine guns ripping through wings and cockpits. 5 Messerschmitts plummeted to the ground, their pilots unable to match the Mustang's agility or escape its pursuit. The bombers pressed on, unscathed, while the surviving Germans scattered, their morale shaken by a fighter that seemed to anticipate their every move.
These encounters were not isolated. Across Germany, the Luftwaffe formations were being decimated. The Mustangs didn't just defend, they hunted. American pilots, now seasoned by months of combat, were trained to seek out German fighters, engaging them far from the bomber streams to prevent them from even approaching their targets. In a September 1944 raid on synthetic oil plants in Mersburg, P-51s from the 4th Fighter Group swept ahead of the bombers, catching a squadron of FW-190s as they took off from their airfield. The Mustangs dove low, their guns blazing, destroying planes on the ground and in the air before the Germans could organize a defense. The airfield was left in chaos, its runways littered with wreckage, its pilots forced to abandon their mission. Such aggressive tactics turned the Luftwaffe's home turf into a killing ground, with Mustang pilots racking up kills at a staggering rate. The devastation wasn't just in the number of planes lost. It was in the loss of veteran pilots. The Luftwaffe, already stretched thin by years of war, relied heavily on its veteran aces, men with dozens of kills who could turn the tide of a dogfight through skill alone. But the Mustangs were cutting them down. In one brutal clash over Berlin, a German ace in a Bf-109, credited with over 80 victories, found himself outmaneuvered by a P-51 piloted by a young American from the 357th Fighter Group. The Mustang's speed allowed it to close the distance, its tight turning radius kept it on the Messerschmitt's tail, and a burst of gunfire sent the German plane spiraling into the countryside below. Each loss like this was a blow the Luftwaffe could scarcely afford. Germany's training programs, crippled by fuel shortages and Allied bombing, couldn't produce replacements fast enough. Young, inexperienced pilots were being thrown into combat, only to fall to the Mustang's guns, further thinning the Luftwaffe's ranks. The Mustang's impact went beyond dogfights. Its long range allowed it to strike at the Luftwaffe's infrastructure, targeting airfields, fuel depots, and training facilities deep in German territory. In late 1944, P-51s began conducting fighter sweeps, missions designed to provoke and destroy German fighters before they could even take off. In one such sweep over southern Germany, Mustangs caught a group of Bf-109s as they prepared to scramble, strafing the airfield and leaving a dozen planes burning before the pilots could reach their cockpits. These raids sapped the Luftwaffe's ability to mount effective defenses, forcing them to hide their remaining planes in dispersed, camouflaged bases. But even this was no escape. The Mustang's pilots, armed with detailed intelligence and a hunger for kills, hunted them relentlessly, their planes swooping low to destroy aircraft parked under trees or in makeshift hangars. The psychological toll on the Luftwaffe was immense. Pilots who had once flown with confidence now faced missions with dread, knowing the Mustangs could appear at any moment from any direction. The Mustang's distinctive silhouette, its sleek fuselage and bubble canopy, became a symbol of fear, nicknamed the fork-tailed devil by some German squadrons. Stories spread of Mustangs that could chase a Focke-Wulf through a dive, match a Messerschmitt in a climb, and still have the fuel to loiter over an airfield, waiting for stragglers. One German pilot, returning from a mission with his plane scarred by .50 caliber rounds, described the experience as like being stalked by wolves. The Luftwaffe's morale, already battered by mounting losses and the strain of defending a shrinking Reich, began to crack under the pressure of an enemy that seemed unstoppable. The Mustang's escort missions were equally devastating to German strategy. By protecting bombers deep into enemy territory, the P-51 enabled the Allies to intensify their bombing campaign, pounding Germany's industrial and military infrastructure into ruin. Oil refineries, aircraft factories, and transportation networks were reduced to rubble, starving the Luftwaffe of the fuel and planes it needed to fight. During a raid on Leipzig in November 1944, Mustangs fended off waves of German fighters, allowing B-17s to deliver a crippling blow to a synthetic fuel plant. The Luftwaffe lost 20 planes in the ensuing dogfights, while the bombers returned with minimal losses. Such missions became routine, each one eroding Germany's ability to wage war. The Mustangs didn't just protect the bombers, they ensured the bombs hit their targets, tightening the noose around the Third Reich. The numbers were stark. By early 1945, the Luftwaffe was losing hundreds of planes each month, with Mustang pilots claiming kills in the dozens per mission. Groups like the 332nd Fighter Group, the famed Tuskegee Airmen, added to the tally, their red-tailed P-51s becoming a feared sight over Germany. The Luftwaffe, once a force of thousands, was reduced to a shadow of its former self, its pilots flying fewer missions in fewer planes and their airfields under constant threat. The Mustangs, backed by America's industrial might, seemed inexhaustible, with new planes and pilots arriving faster than the Germans could shoot them down. The Luftwaffe's commanders, staring at dwindling rosters and empty hangars, knew they were fighting a losing battle. Their dream of air superiority was gone, replaced by a desperate struggle to survive. The devastation wrought by the P-51 Mustang was a turning point not just in battles, but in the war itself. By destroying Luftwaffe formations and protecting bombers, the Mustang gave the Allies unchallenged control of the skies, paving the way for the D-Day invasion, the liberation of France, and the final push into Germany. The German pilots, who had once laughed at the Mustang's sleek design, now saw it as a harbinger of defeat, a fighter that had turned their own tactics against them. The Mustang didn't just win dogfights, it broke the Luftwaffe's back, ensuring that the skies over Europe belonged to the Allies.
As the spring of 1945 dawned, the skies over Europe told a story of transformation, one written in the contrails of the P-51 Mustang. The Luftwaffe, once the terror of the continent, was a broken force, its airfields littered with the wreckage of Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs, its pilots either lost to the Mustang's guns or grounded by a lack of fuel and planes. The P-51 had not just fought in the air war, it had redefined it, turning the tide of air superiority and paving the way for the Allied victory that ended the Third Reich. From the beaches of Normandy to the ruins of Berlin, the Mustang had been a relentless presence, escorting bombers, hunting enemy fighters, and striking at the heart of Germany's war machine. Its legacy, however, stretched far beyond the final shots of World War II. The P-51 reshaped the principles of air combat, influenced the design of future aircraft, and cemented its place as a legendary symbol of courage, ingenuity, and the triumph of adaptability over adversity. The Mustang's impact on the war's outcome was undeniable. By early 1945, it had helped the Allies achieve near total control of the skies, a dominance that was critical to the success of ground campaigns and the strategic bombing that crippled Germany's industry. The P-51's ability to escort bombers deep into enemy territory over Berlin, Munich, and beyond ensured that Allied air forces could strike with precision and impunity, destroying factories, oil refineries, and transportation networks that kept the German war effort alive. Without the Mustang's long range and dogfighting prowess, the B-17s and B-24s would have faced far heavier losses, their missions curtailed by the Luftwaffe's once formidable defenses. Instead, the P-51s roamed freely, their silver wings a constant threat to German pilots who could no longer take to the air without fear of being hunted. By the time Germany surrendered in May 1945, the Luftwaffe was a shadow of its former self, its strength sapped by the Mustang's relentless campaign. The men who flew the P-51 were as much a part of its legacy as the plane itself. Pilots from groups like the 4th, 352nd, and 332nd Fighter Groups, the latter famously known as the Tuskegee Airmen with their red-tailed Mustangs, turned the P-51 into a weapon of precision and daring. These pilots, many of whom had been novices just 2 years earlier, became some of the war's most celebrated aces, their kill counts rivaling those of the Luftwaffe's best. They flew missions that pushed the limits of endurance, staying aloft for 8 hours or more, battling fatigue as much as the enemy. Their courage was evident in stories of lone Mustangs taking on multiple German fighters, of pilots strafing airfields under heavy anti-aircraft fire, or of escorts staying with damaged bombers to shepherd them home. The Mustang gave these men a platform to shine, and they in turn gave it a reputation as a fighter that could do anything asked of it. The Mustang's influence on air combat extended beyond its wartime achievements. It introduced a new paradigm for fighter aircraft, one that emphasized versatility, range, and integration with broader military strategies. Before the Mustang, fighters were often designed for specific roles: dogfighting, interception, or ground attack, with limited flexibility. The Germans had built their air force around specialized planes, like the heavily armed FW-190 or the high-altitude Bf-109, but the Mustang showed that a single aircraft could excel in multiple roles. It could escort bombers, engage in dogfights, strafe ground targets, and even conduct reconnaissance, all while maintaining the speed and maneuverability to outmatch its opponents. This versatility became a blueprint for post-war fighters, influencing designs like the F-86 Sabre, which would dominate the skies of the Korean War, and later jets that prioritized adaptability over narrow specialization. The Mustang's design also left a lasting mark on aviation technology. Its Merlin-powered airframe, a collaboration between American engineering and British innovation, set a standard for performance that few aircraft of its era could match. Its laminar flow wing, which reduced drag and boosted speed, was a leap forward in aerodynamics, studied and emulated by designers for decades. The Mustang's long range, achieved through drop tanks and efficient fuel management, redefined what was possible for a single-engine fighter, paving the way for transcontinental and transoceanic missions in later aircraft. Even its armament, 6.50 caliber machine guns in the P-51D, proved a perfect balance of firepower and reliability, capable of shredding enemy planes without the jamming issues that plagued some cannon-armed fighters. These innovations made the Mustang not just a wartime success, but a template for the future of air combat. The Mustang's legacy wasn't confined to military circles. It captured the imagination of the public, becoming a symbol of American ingenuity and resilience. After the war, stories of the Mustang's exploits filled newspapers and books, its sleek silhouette immortalized in photographs and films. Pilots like Clarence "Bud" Anderson and George Preddy became household names, their tales of dogfights and daring raids inspiring a generation. The Tuskegee Airmen who flew their red-tailed Mustangs with unmatched skill broke barriers and shattered stereotypes, their legacy intertwined with the Mustangs as a testament to courage and equality. Air shows and museums kept the P-51 alive, its polished aluminum gleaming under the sun as crowds marveled at the machine that had turned the tide of the air war. Even today, restored Mustangs fly at exhibitions, their Merlin engines roaring with the same power that once struck fear into the Luftwaffe. The Mustang's impact extended to the broader strategy of air warfare. It proved that air superiority wasn't just about winning dogfights, it was about enabling a larger war effort, from protecting bombers to disrupting enemy logistics. The P-51's ability to dominate the skies allowed Allied ground forces to advance without fear of Luftwaffe interference, a factor critical to the success of campaigns like the invasion of Normandy and the push across the Rhine. This combined arms approach, where air forces supported bombers, ground troops, and strategic objectives, became a cornerstone of modern military doctrine. Air forces around the world studied the Mustang's campaigns, learning how a single aircraft could shift the balance of a war by being everywhere, doing everything, and never backing down. The P-51's legendary status was cemented by its sheer effectiveness.
Over 15,000 Mustangs were built, and they flew in every major theater of the war, from Europe to the Pacific. They claimed thousands of enemy aircraft, with some estimates suggesting P-51 pilots downed over 4,950 German planes in Europe alone. Their presence ensured that Allied bombers could deliver their payloads with unprecedented accuracy, crippling Germany's ability to fight. The Mustang didn't win the war single-handedly, no aircraft could, but it was the linchpin that held the Allied air strategy together, ensuring that every bomb dropped, every ground advance, and every naval operation could proceed under the shield of air superiority. The Luftwaffe, which had once laughed at the Mustang's sleek design, learned too late that it was facing a machine that could outfly, outlast, and outfight them. In the years after the war, the P-51 remained a touchstone for aviators and historians. It served in conflicts like the Korean War, where its reliability and ground attack capabilities kept it relevant, even as jet aircraft emerged. It flew with air forces around the world, from Canada to South Africa, a testament to its enduring design. But its true legacy lies in what it represented: the power of adaptability, the strength of collaboration, and the ability of ordinary men to achieve extraordinary things. The P-51 Mustang was more than a fighter. It was a symbol of a nation's resolve, a machine that turned the tide of the air war and left an indelible mark on the history of air combat. Long after the last shots were fired, the Mustang's roar still echoes, a reminder of a time when a sleek silver plane changed the skies forever.